Hello and welcome to the video. This is my comparison and overview of the T Pro versus the RadioMaster Zorro. Now, I looked at the RadioMaster Zorro a couple of weeks ago, but I've had lots of interest about can you do your comparison and thoughts on comparing the T Pro and the RadioMaster Zorro. Now, at first appearance, they look like they're very similar radios with lots of similar functionality and similar pieces on it. However, the devil is in the detail, and although they look like they're very similar, you know what? There's actually some pretty fundamental differences, so I thought it would go through. Again, don't forget, all reviews are subjective, and a lot of this is based on what I use these radios for and how I fly. Now, first of all, let's talk about the similarities. Big stuff is that they are both pincher and they're both thumb friendly. So no matter how you fly, these will fit comfortably in the hand, and they are designed to be quite ergonomic. And for those of you coming to the hobby or have people coming into the hobby who are coming from a gamer style, then these will feel very natural in the hand straight away. Both of them use lithium-ion removable batteries. In this little thing here, it is a slightly unusual size of battery. It's an 18350. That'll give you hour and a half worth of flying. However, it does have an extra trick up its sleeve. It does allow you to run it off an external 2S LiPo battery. See the original review video where I go through a bit of detail about all of that. In terms of this fella, this one underneath here is actually a full-size 18650. So that means that you can use the pretty standard batteries that most of us have kicking around that are used in lots of places in the hobby. Both are available in both eLRS and 4-in-1 multi-protocol versions. Unfortunately, none are available with both those options out the box. However, there are lots of bundles starting to come out, and RadioMaster have teamed up with people like TBS, so there's even versions of things like the TBS Crossfire system available for things like the RadioMaster stuff as well, straight out the box. Both have trims, slightly different trims in different places. Both have screens that would use, the standard stuff. The T Pro has gone for the smaller style, which is a little bit of an eye test, but you can definitely read everything, whereas the Zorro has gone for a much bigger screen.
Welcome to HTX.
About the same physical size as you would probably find on something like a QX7 style radio. Very similar in weight, and both have things like the USB joystick functionality. Now, there are some big differences with this. First of all, there is a case available that comes with the T Pro, not one that comes with the RadioMaster. I'm sure RadioMaster no doubt will come out with cases and potential gimbal upgrades and all kinds of things in the future if they follow along with the stuff that they did with the TX16S. And the larger Zorro does feel much more solid in the hands. Now, I think that's partially due to that little bit of extra weight, but also it does feel slightly nicer made. You have kind of the metal bezels around, you have a slightly nicer feel in the hand, the way the buttons all kind of fall under your fingertips. Even the ones on the back, we'll come on to buttons in a minute. It does feel a little bit nicer than the T Pro. The T Pro feels quite a bit more plasticky. Things like, for example, the navigation button down here is plastic, while it is metal on the RadioMaster. In terms of the gimbals are very, very similar indeed. In terms of the movement, they're pretty much identical. Again, thumbers or pinchers will be able to use both. The tension on the RadioMaster one is a little bit higher, and I prefer the way that feels. And there's also potentially adjustment screws to change how things work. It is a very, very nice radio to hold in your hands. This one is fine. For me, the sticks are a little bit light. Neither of the throttles in these Mo2 radios have any ratchet on them, so there's no kind of clickiness. They are completely smooth. But again, that's very much down to personal feel, but I like the way that RadioMaster has set them up. Navigation, full set of navigation on the Zorro, but let's talk about the T Pro first. So this has the standard thing where if you press the menu button once, you get into the menu, and then you can page through everything. Long pressing the page button will take you back. Standard stuff that's been on these kind of radios forever. And then you have the exit button at the bottom. On the RadioMaster, they've done it slightly differently. So you have both the model and the system buttons, as well as the telemetry button down here, which isn't available on the T Pro, and it has the return and forward. So if we go into the model memory on here, and again, this one came with some default models on here. Hopefully you can see that, which I thought was quite a nice way to do it. We can then kind of go through each of the screens in turn, and we can exit out of that. And then once we are happy, we can also press return out of there. We can press and hold the telemetry screens, and that all works. So in terms of the navigation, it's a little bit more mature and similar to what you find on the larger radios over here on the Zorro. The screen is very different. We have, of course, the full-size screen versus the little screen. And it's not only the screen size, the backlit and the way the backlight works is incredibly different as well. I find this an awful lot easier to see, and even at a glance, things like Lua scripts are going to be much easier to see what the heck's going on a screen like that than the smaller one here. It looks like there is a backlight, but it's only from the bottom, and it's still fine, you know, because lots of pilots, let's face it, going and flying FPV and not looking at the screen. But for those of us that do use Lua scripts, I'm a fan of the iNav Lua script while I'm waiting for things like the GPS lock to happen, or in the event of an FPV problem where I'm monitoring how it's coming back via the Lua script. Having the bigger screen is going to be a very welcome thing. Lots of switches on both of them. However, the way they've implemented them is quite different. If we do the T Pro first, then there is the 6 position switches here at the top. Really not sure why these are on here. To be honest, these 6 position switches tend to be only useful if you have lots of different modes set up. I have lots of radios with the 6 position switches there, and to be honest, I don't really use them for the modes. Interesting thing to preserve that on there, but I'd have preferred more 2 or 3 position switches. Now the switches on here are a bit wacky, in my humble opinion. We have these kind of push buttons on the corners. We have these 3 positions switches, but they're rockers rather than switches. We have 2 rotating controls, which is nice for, you know, pan and tilts, and there is a little bit of an indent in the middle, which is great. And that's your lot. So you got the 6 at the front, you've got 2 3 position switches, 2 momentary switches. I mean, you can configure all those up in OpenTX. 2 sliders at the back with a central detent, and then you have your 6-piece control at the front. Obviously, the trims here are slightly unconventional. They do work as trims, but you can also disable those and use them for other controls as well in flight. In terms of the Zorro, surprised at how many things are actually on here. So there are 2 3-position switches at the top. These are 2 2-position switches. We have 2 rotating controls, sadly without an indent, but there is a very small raised part to give you an idea if you fingertip where that is. A little indent for the middle position would have been very welcome. 2 momentary switches as well. And then, believe it or not, they've also put 2 momentary switches on the back. Now, that is probably more switches than most pilots are going to need, and we have traditional trims here that work in the same way that fixed-wing pilots are used to. Now, the other thing you'll notice here is that the sound and the SD card and everything has been set up on this one. So this one is making a noise, and it is making quite a lot of noise. The nice thing with the switches on here, and let me kind of show you, as a thumber, I hold the Zorro like this. My fingertips are right where they need to be to operate all those switches, and my little middle finger is over this button. Now, why is that interesting? Well, you know, that could be your pre-arm for your beta flight, or for your instant trim switch if you're going to be flying something like a fixed wing. So this is very much a radio that I would recommend if you're going to have a small glider or something you're going to take to the field to fly some kind of fixed wing. This is going to be great. In terms of where the switches fit on here, For me, my fingers rest on the rotary controls. I can get to the others, but it's too much of a push. I have to kind of reach around in order to get to the 2-3 position switches, and I don't think that's ideal. If those are your arming or your disarming or your return to home, you want them so that you can get to them without having to move your grip, particularly if you're flying something like a plane which doesn't have a flight controller. But other thing to talk about then is the antenna. The antenna is movable on the T Pro. It kind of moves up and down out the way. It's kind of marked what it is. It's not rotatable though. I don't think personally, assuming there is the antenna element in here, I haven't taken it apart to check, but assuming it is, horizontal's fine for close in on multi-rotors and things. Having it vertically, in my humble opinion, is a much better way to do it on my planes. Check my Antenna Lab series as why that is. That's a little bit limiting. Having it as a swivel would have been a really nice idea. That's the way that TBS did it, and I think that's a good way to do it. The antenna on here is quite sweet. It actually lives behind the screen. If I can make sure that I'm pulling it out from the right way. It does pull out, and it will also rotate and move into other positions as well. I love that idea. That's a really, really smart feature. It does feel a little bit flimsy, I'll be honest, but I like the fact that you can move it out the way of all the electronics and you can have it vertical. Again, a really nice feature if you're flying fixed wing. There is also the option for an external antenna underneath here. You can fit a kit that will allow you to put an external antenna on, which is, again, just RadioMaster really thinking about features and options of how you're going to use it. Talking about rear bays, the Zorro has a rear bay that's kind of ready to go, one of the kind of micro JR bays. That's ready and all wired up. There is the same kind of bay available on the back of here, but it's something that you have to fit. It comes in the kit and it kind of clips into place, and that gives you the option of adding it. But again, if you don't want that on and you're not going to be using an external module, you can just leave the back nice and uncluttered. But actually for me, I quite like having this bay on here, particularly playing with things like ELRS and some of the smaller crossfire stuff. Having it all ready to go is just handy, rather than realize you're going to want to try something out and having to then fit the bay on the back. So are these two as similar as they first appear? No, I don't think they are. I think like the RadioMaster feels like an attempt to take a much larger radio and shrink it down into this form factor and preserve all of those features and switches and everything that pilots that are coming from a larger radio would expect to find. And they've also made sure that some of the more traditional pieces are in place, like the trims in kind of a traditional layout, as well as add some extra pieces like the buttons on the back. Brilliant for instant trim or pre-arm or stuff like that. This T Pro feels more like it's an upgrade of something like the Beta FPV radios, where if you have one of those but you want more functionality, the ability to program stuff, then this is going to be a great step up. In terms of which one I would choose at the moment, for the way that I fly, for the fact that I fly flight controllers, I fly stuff without flight controllers, so I'm a fixed wing, a multi-rotor pilot, and pretty much everything in between, at the moment the RadioMaster is a closer fit to how it kind of works in my hand. The only thing about the RadioMaster I wish they'd have done is use a slightly bigger battery in here rather than those little 18350s. I know you can run it for an external battery and it does kind of fit in here, but it would have been nice to just have maybe an 18500 or something else. I know people have already started doing that mod. So hopefully that's been interesting for those of you that have been looking at that, and kind of gives a no nonsense overview of the differences between the two. They're both great examples of where the hobby is at the moment, but I think they're coming at this form factor from two slightly different directions. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organized into easy to follow playlists that, if you're trying to learn a topic, will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.